Welcome to AI Unraveled, your daily strategic briefing. It is Thursday, March 5th, 2026. I'm your co-host, Anna. This episode is brought to you by Aria. As AI agents gain the ability to use your computer and write their own code, governance is the only thing standing between innovation and a security breach. Aria is the control plane for the agentic age. Today, we have a massive briefing. We are covering the launch of GPT-5.4 and its computer use capabilities. We're diving into the war of the memos between Anthropic and OpenAI, and we're looking at why Apple is suddenly obsessed with identifying exactly where an AI is lying to you. This podcast is produced by Etienne Newman, senior software engineer and passionate soccer dad from Canada. Now let's unravel the news.
Before we dive into today's deep dive, a quick note for the brands listening. If you are trying to reach the architects of the AI revolution, not just the tourists, but the technical leaders actually building the stack, we are opening up limited partnership spots for Q1. See how we can simulate your product for the technical buyer at jamgamind.com/partners.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We spent a lot of time here analyzing the structural shifts in the technology sector, right? Looking for the underlying patterns that dictate where enterprise infrastructure and consumer applications are actually heading.
Yeah, the real macro trends.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And today is Thursday, March 5th, 2026. And if you were looking at the landscape of artificial intelligence this morning, you were seeing a massive, almost paradoxical fracture right down the middle of the industry.
It really is a paradox because on one side, on the technical side, the software has never been more refined or more capable of autonomous action.
Right.
I mean, the models are effectively waking up and walking around the digital office today.
They really are. But if you look at the executive layer today, the human beings steering these companies, they are engaged in a level of corporate warfare that is, frankly, unprecedented.
Unprecedented and incredibly public.
Yeah. We have a stack of the latest AI intelligence reports and daily rundowns that just crossed the desk today. And the contrast between the pristine code being shipped and the chaotic boardroom drama is just, it's stark.
It is a remarkable dichotomy to witness. What we are really tracking today is the collision between peak technological maturity and, well, peak corporate instability.
Yeah.
The data we're analyzing outlines an industry that is simultaneously reorganizing the fabric of global labor, while the architects of that technology are literally tearing each other apart in leaked memos, broken alliances, bruised egos.
It's messy.
Very. We are seeing what I would categorize as competitive toxicity layered directly on top of the agentic breakthrough.
And that dynamic is exactly what we are going to unpack for you today.
Right.
We're going to cut through the noise of the boardroom disputes and all the dense technical jargon to show you exactly how this agentic breakthrough is reshaping your digital life right now.
And why that matters.
All right, more importantly, we're going to look at why the competitive toxicity behind the scenes actually matters to your tech stack. It's going to dictate your vendor dependencies and your business strategy.
Absolutely.
So we have to start with the most significant technical leap of the day, which comes from OpenAI. They just dropped a massive update to their model lineup, and the architecture it's incredibly aggressive.
Aggressive in both its capabilities and how they're segmenting the market. They just rolled out two distinct models. First, we have GPT-5.4 Thinking, which is a reasoning-heavy architecture explicitly aimed at complex workflows.
Like coding.
Right, software engineering, and crucially, the supervision of other AI agents. And second, they released GPT-5.4 Pro, designed as their flagship model for maximum raw performance.
Well, we should note the velocity here. I mean, this comes just days after GPT-5.3 Instant dropped.
The deployment speed is staggering. But the underlying strategy with the thinking variant is what really merits close analysis here. OpenAI has specifically optimized GPT-5.4 Thinking to execute these autonomous agent workflows with a significantly reduced compute overhead.
Yeah, the intelligence report actually highlights this optimization by noting it lowers costs for, and I quote, claw-pilled users like Jason.
Which is just a great bit of insider industry humor.
It really is.
Yeah.
For those entrenched in the developer community, being claw-pilled has evolved into this catch-all term for users who have completely bought into the agentic ecosystem.
Right, the power users.
Exactly. The ones running dozens of autonomous digital workers simultaneously to manage these crazy complex pipelines. But let me challenge the core premise here for a second.
Sure.
If I am a power user running 20 agents in parallel to, scrape data, synthesize reports, draft code, The compute cost is certainly a bottleneck.
Yeah.
But is cheaper compute really the breakthrough today? I mean, we've seen models get cheaper every single quarter.
You're right to question that, because cheaper compute is just the enabler. What actually changes the paradigm today is the environment they are deploying this into.
The sandbox.
Exactly. They launched the Codex app on Windows with a native sandbox. This is the holy grail for AI agents.
Let's unpack why native computer use is the holy grail, because for the past several years, the paradigm of how we interact with AI has been highly constrained.
Very constrained. The AI has effectively functioned as an incredibly intelligent oracle, but it's trapped inside a text box. You type a query, the model outputs text, and the human operator is required to physically bridge the gap.
Right, you're the manual execution layer. You have to copy the text, open the right software application, navigate the graphical user interface, and actually execute the task.
Exactly. The human was the hands for the AI's brain. But this native sandbox in the Codex app completely flips that. It changes the AI from a chatbot you talk to into an employee that physically clicks and types for you.
But let's dig into the mechanics of this. Because a few years ago, we saw open source experiments like AutoGPT try to navigate operating systems, and they largely failed.
They were incredibly brittle.
Right. They relied on analyzing screenshots or hooking into these really rudimentary APIs. And if a button moved 3 pixels to the left on your screen, the whole agent broke down.
Yeah, they were operating from the outside in.
So how is OpenAI's Codex sandbox fundamentally different from those early clunky attempts at native computer use?
The difference is architectural integration at the OS level. A native sandbox environment within Windows implies that the agent isn't just screen reading. It has structured, secure access to the underlying file system, the application state, and the accessibility APIs of Windows itself.
It actually knows what the computer's doing.
Exactly. However, because it operates within a sandbox, there's a strict virtualization boundary. The operating system essentially creates an isolated partition.
Like a padded room.
A digital padded room, yeah. The agent can open files, move cursors, and execute commands within that container, but it is mathematically walled off from the core kernel of the operating system.
Which is vital for security.
Completely vital. It prevents the agent from, say, accidentally rewriting your system registry or executing malicious code that compromises the bare metal of the machine.
So it's an employee clicking around, but in a room where it can't accidentally demolish the building.
Precisely.
But that brings us to the core issue of enterprise adoption, which is reliability. Because if I am going to let a digital worker loose in my Windows directory, even a sandboxed one, I need absolute certainty it isn't going to hallucinate a command and delete a massive project file instead of saving it.
And that is exactly why OpenAI is branding 5.4 as their most factual model to date.
Right. The data points from the rundown today indicate it is 18% less likely to make errors and 33% less likely to hallucinate compared to GPT 5.2.
And it's highly adept at multi-source citations now. Those metrics are massive when you evaluate them in the context of enterprise risk management.
How so?
Well, in a traditional chatbot interface, a hallucination is just a minor friction point, right? The AI invents a fictional legal precedent, you spot it during proofreading, and you just correct it. The cost of failure is just the 2 minutes lost to editing.
Right.
But in an agentic workflow with native computer use, the cost of a hallucination compounds exponentially. If an agent is executing database migrations or managing financial ledgers natively on your machine, a 33% reduction in hallucinations is literally the difference between a viable enterprise product and an unacceptable liability.
I understand the mathematical improvement, but I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
If it is 33% less likely to hallucinate than 5.2, that still leaves a non-zero margin of error. The report even includes this sort of sarcastic aside suggesting users should still ask Grok or Claude for a double confirmation on critical tasks.
Yeah, the trust isn't absolute yet.
Right. So if an agent is hallucinating even 1% of the time while rewriting my file system, isn't native computer use still fundamentally too dangerous for widespread integration without us constantly babysitting it?
That is the exact reason why the GPT 5.4 thinking model was deployed in tandem. The thinking architecture is designed to implement these systemic redundancy loops. It doesn't just generate a command and execute it blindly. It evaluates its own proposed execution path against the parameters of the sandbox.
It thinks before it clicks.
It simulates the outcome before committing the action, yeah. So that 33% reduction in base-level hallucinations is compounded by the model's ability to supervise its own subagents.
Right.
But your skepticism is completely warranted. Brute forcing a reduction in hallucinations through massive parameter scale and compute-heavy reasoning loops is an incredibly expensive strategy. It's essentially using a sledgehammer to fix a watch.
Which is the perfect pivot to our next source today. Because while OpenAI is using that massive compute sledgehammer, Apple just published research demonstrating they are building a scalpel.
A precision scalpel, yeah.
We are looking at a research paper Apple dropped, detailing a framework called Reinforcement Learning for Hallucination Span Detection. And we need to break down why this matters to you, the listener, because span detection sounds like incredibly dry engineering nomenclature.
It does.
But it actually solves the exact enterprise usability problem we just debated.
To really appreciate the elegance of Apple's approach here, we have to understand the limitations of how we detect hallucinations right now. Historically, hallucination detection has operated as a binary function.
Right, a simple yes or no.
Exactly. A secondary verification model looks at the output and gives a Boolean verdict. True or false? Does this text contain a hallucination, yes or no? And from a user experience perspective, that is severely limiting.
It's useless in a long document. If I use an AI to summarize a 40-page legal contract and the binary detection system just slaps a warning on it that says contains hallucination, the output is effectively worthless to me.
You have no idea where the error is.
Exactly. I don't know if the AI hallucinated the entire indemnity clause on page 3 or if it just got the date wrong in the header on page 1. I still have to manually audit all 40 pages against the original text.
Which completely negates the efficiency gain of using the AI in the first place.
Exactly. So Apple's span detection shifts the paradigm from binary categorization to token-level precision.
It pinpoints the exact word or phrase.
Right, the specific span of tokens where the model went wrong.
And the methodology they employed to achieve this is fascinating. They used a multi-step decision-making process rooted in reinforcement learning. The framework is trained by receiving incremental rewards when it accurately identifies these incorrect token spans.
It's rewarded for matching human evaluators.
Exactly. It's learning to audit text exactly the way a highly trained human would.
The source material actually uses this brilliant analogy to explain it. Binary detection is like a mathematics teacher handing back your complex calculus exam with a giant red F on the front page, offering absolutely no explanation where your logic failed.
You just failed. Try again.
Right. And the burden is entirely on you to redo the entire exam to find the error. But Apple's span detection is the equivalent of that teacher sitting down next to you, reviewing your equation line by line, and highlighting the exact variable in the third step where you carried a 2 instead of a 3.
What's particularly notable is how well this works. Apple's framework successfully outperformed conventional detection methods on the RAG truth benchmark.
Let's pause and unpack RAG for the audience, because understanding retrieval augmented generation is really critical to understanding why Apple's span detection builds so much trust.
It's the core of enterprise AI right now.
Right. RAG isn't just asking a model a random question. It's an architecture where the AI first searches a closed database, like your company's proprietary HR manuals or your internal financial records.
It retrieves the relevant documents first.
Yeah, and then uses those documents as an open book to generate an answer.
Precisely. RAG is what allows enterprises to use AI without having to train a massive model from scratch on their own private data. But the RAG architecture introduces a very specific vulnerability.
Which is?
The model might retrieve the perfectly correct document, but then hallucinate the summary of that document. And the RAG truth benchmark tests exactly this. It evaluates whether a model is hallucinating against the specific semantic context of the retrieved documents. So Apple's span detection, excelling on this benchmark, proves that it is highly adept at auditing enterprise-grade, data-grounded workflows.
So to synthesize this for the listener, why does span detection fundamentally alter your daily workflow? It establishes verifiable trust.
It allows for genuine human-AI collaboration.
Right, rather than just human oversight. If OpenAI's agent does the heavy lifting of generating a complex report, and Apple's span detector just highlights the 6 specific words that are mathematically questionable, you only have to verify those 6 words.
It transforms an untrustworthy block of text into a highly efficient, targeted auditing workflow.
It's a game changer for deployment.
It is. And it represents a deeply American approach to technological development. We are seeing intense specialization, highly guarded private corporate research, and a relentless focus on granular software-level precision to solve market friction.
Right, the private sector battling it out.
But if we zoom out to the global stage, the macro view, we see a radically different approach to how these agents will actually be deployed in the real economy.
Yes, let's shift to China, because the contrast outlined in these intelligence reports is staggering. While the U.S. ecosystem is entirely focused on API access, closed-door enterprise contracts, and micro-optimizations like spam detection, China just released their new 5-year plan.
And the focus is entirely different.
Completely. According to the rundown today, this strategic blueprint mentions artificial intelligence more than 50 times.
50 explicit mentions within a central macroeconomic planning document is an overwhelming signal of state intent.
It reads like an absolute mandate for a different kind of economic future. The overarching framework is titled the AI Plus Action Plan.
And this transcends the commercialization of consumer software. It is a blueprint for structural economic integration. The plan specifically mandates the deployment of robotics and AI in sectors facing severe labor shortages.
Right, the demographic reality they're facing.
Exactly. But the key phrasing that requires our attention is the directive to utilize AI agents capable of performing tasks with minimal human guidance.
Minimal human guidance. That phrase is the exact geopolitical mirror of OpenAI launching Codex in a Windows sandbox.
The underlying technology is identical.
Autonomous agents executing tasks. But the deployment strategy couldn't be more different. In the US, it's a productivity tool for a software developer. In China, it is a state-mandated economic survival mechanism.
Designed to physically and digitally offset the realities of a rapidly aging population and a shrinking industrial workforce.
But the element of this 5-year plan that genuinely disrupts the current paradigm is their approach to the underlying models. For the first time, Beijing is loudly broadcasting open-source AI as their flagship development strategy.
This is the critical architectural divergence between the two superpowers right now. If you analyze the frontier developers in the United States, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, these are fundamentally closed-door, closed-source ecosystems.
Locked down tight.
The model weights are proprietary secrets locked behind API paywalls, and these U.S. corporations are engaged in a zero-sum battle for corporate supremacy. China is deliberately charting the opposite course.
They are optimizing for an open-source, economy-wide integration strategy. So let's extrapolate the strategic implications of that.
That's massive.
If the U.S. strategy relies on maintaining a monopoly on the smartest, most massive, centralized intelligence locked in a data center, what happens when an entire competing nation mandates the open-source integration of highly capable agents across its entire manufacturing base?
It alters the physics of global competitiveness. The theory driving their open-source mandate is one of decentralized resilience.
Explain that.
Well, in a closed API paradigm, every query, every manufacturing adjustment, every logistics optimization must ping a centralized server farm in the U.S. If the underlying foundation is open source, the model weights can be downloaded locally.
Right to the edge.
Innovation and fine-tuning can happen at the absolute edge of the network. A factory in Shenzhen can take an open-source model, aggressively fine-tune it exclusively on their proprietary CNC machining data, and deploy it entirely locally.
Without relying on continuous internet connectivity.
Or paying a usage tax to a centralized U.S. cloud provider.
It effectively commoditizes the intelligence layer to boost the efficiency of the physical manufacturing layer. So while U.S. tech giants are pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into pristine data centers, chasing this monolithic, godlike AGI, China appears focused on deploying millions of specialized open-source blue-collar and white-collar agents today.
To immediately plug the demographic holes in their real-world economy, the philosophical difference is profound.
It really is. But regardless of whether these agents are running locally in a factory overseas or operating inside a Windows sandbox on your laptop, the fundamental challenge for management remains exactly the same.
Yeah.
Oversight.
You have to know what they're doing.
Exactly. As AI models gain computer use and agents start performing tasks with minimal human guidance, as China's new plan suggests, you need a way to track who is doing what. AI is the only platform that gives you a bird's-eye view of your agentic workforce.
And implementing that kind of tracking and governance over an agentic workforce is going to be the defining challenge for CIOs, particularly when you analyze the sheer volatility currently paralyzing the companies that are actually building these foundation models.
Which brings us perfectly to the second core theme of our analysis today.
Yeah.
The competitive toxicity dominating the Western AI sector.
the boardroom drama.
We have spent the first half of this deep dive marveling at the technical breakthroughs. Now we have to turn our attention to the human element, because the drama unfolding right now is actively threatening the stability of the entire ecosystem.
It's highly unstable.
If you want to understand the current fragility of the AI landscape, you have to look at the internal memo leaked from Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei. It is a scorching 1,600-word document obtained by the information.
It is unprecedented in its bluntness for a sitting CEO.
Totally uncharacteristic.
To accurately decode the subtext of Amodei's memo, we have to establish the immediate context. Just days prior to this leak, Anthropic was engaged in high-level advanced negotiations with the Pentagon.
The Department of Defense.
Right. The objective was to establish a framework for how the DoD could access and deploy Anthropic's Claude models. And those negotiations catastrophically collapsed.
And the breakdown was not overpricing.
No. It centered on a highly specific dispute regarding the contractual language around bulk data analysis.
Let's define what bulk data analysis means in a military context, because it's not just summarizing Excel spreadsheets.
Not at all.
The Pentagon wanted the ability to use Claude to process massive, indiscriminate data sets, domestic surveillance potentially. Anthropic drew a hard ethical line, pushing for strict contractual guarantees that their models would never be utilized for domestic surveillance operations or integrated into the targeting systems of autonomous weapons.
And the Pentagon, acting on their mandate for strategic flexibility, refused to accept those restrictions. Consequently, the Pentagon didn't merely walk away from the negotiating table. They formally labeled Anthropic a supply chain risk.
A supply chain risk.
Yes. In the realm of federal contracting, that label is highly damaging. It signals to other government agencies and regulated industries that Anthropic's compliance frameworks are fundamentally incompatible with state security requirements.
It's a massive blow to their enterprise ambitions. And the sequence of events immediately following this collapse is what triggered the Amodei Memo.
Because OpenAI swooped right in.
Hours after the White House publicly criticized Anthropic's stance, OpenAI aggressively maneuvered into the vacuum. They immediately signed a Department of War deal, incorporating the exact same bulk data analysis terms that Anthropic had just rejected.
Now, the source material notes that Sam Altman later publicly admitted OpenAI shouldn't have rushed that agreement.
Which is a rare instance of public backpedaling from Altman.
Very rare. But that rush to secure the DoD contract by undercutting Anthropic's ethical red lines was the absolute catalyst for Amodei's 1,600-word detonation.
So let's examine the specific claims within the memo. And we need to lay down a crucial rule for this part of the deep dive. When we discuss the political elements here, we are remaining strictly impartial.
Absolutely.
We are just reporting Amodei's words from the memo to analyze the market impact. We are absolutely not taking a side on the politics or endorsing these viewpoints. We're looking at this strictly through the lens of market dynamics.
Right, the corporate rivalry. The most explosive assertion in the memo is Amodei categorizing OpenAI's Pentagon deal as maybe 20% real and 80% safety theater.
80% safety theater.
That phrase is a devastating critique, especially coming from Dario Amodei, who was previously the VP of research at OpenAI before he left to found Anthropic.
When he accuses OpenAI of safety theater, he is attacking the core foundational narrative that OpenAI uses to assure enterprise clients that their models are secure.
He is alleging that OpenAI's safety protocols are purely performative, designed to appease regulators while securing lucrative contracts rather than actual structural guardrails.
And the memo also devolves into direct personal indictments of Sam Altman's leadership style. Amodei accuses Altman of gaslighting,
asserting that OpenAI deliberately manipulated the public narrative to frame Anthropic as unreasonable and unpatriotic during the Pentagon fallout.
Furthermore, Amodei deliberately injects the prevailing political optics into his corporate critique. This is where the memo becomes highly unconventional for a tech CEO.
He gets very specific.
He explicitly references the recent $25 million political donation made by OpenAI President Greg Brockman to Donald Trump. He juxtaposes that donation against Anthropic's organizational culture,
stating emphatically that Anthropic refused to provide what he termed dictator-style praise to secure government favor.
Again, setting aside the political nature of the comment, we have to ask what Amodei is trying to achieve by putting this in writing to his staff and letting it leak.
He is executing a strategy of aggressive differentiation. By highlighting Brockman's donation and employing phrases like dictator-style praise, Amodei is attempting to draw an indelible moral and cultural boundary between Anthropic and OpenAI.
He's signaling to his workforce and to ethical-focused investors that Anthropic operates on an entirely distinct ethical axis.
But the analytical question we have to ask is whether this is a genuine defense of deeply held AI safety principles, or if it is a calculated positioning maneuver by a company that just lost a multi-billion-dollar foundational government contract.
I think you have to look at Amodei's behavior a few days later to answer that, because the rundown notes a massive tonal shift.
A complete 180.
Just days after leaking this document, accusing OpenAI of safety theater, Amodei spoke publicly and adopted a highly conciliatory tone regarding the military. He stated that Anthropic and the Pentagon have much more in common than we have differences.
That is severe corporate whiplash. You go from walking away from the table over bulk data analysis to essentially begging to be let back in the room.
It suggests the realization that ideological purity is difficult to maintain when it results in being locked out of the largest procurement market on the planet.
Government defense contracts offer effectively limitless funding. As the intelligence report correctly observes, this memo reads like the culmination of years of suppressed animosities since the 2020 OpenAI exodus finally boiling over.
It's gotten incredibly personal. And as the report concludes, this entire Pentagon saga is making the broader AI industry appear fundamentally unstable to outside observers.
The toxicity isn't just directed at direct competitors, though.
No, it's actively eroding the foundational partnerships that built this industry. Which brings us to arguably the most consequential strategic maneuver detailed in today's intelligence. OpenAI isn't just fighting Anthropic. They are systematically preparing to sever ties with their largest financial backer.
The shifting dynamics of the OpenAI and Microsoft relationship are essential to understand because it dictates the future architecture of the entire cloud ecosystem.
Right. According to sourcing from the information, OpenAI is currently dedicating internal engineering resources to build a code repository platform with the explicit goal of replacing Microsoft's GitHub.
Let's contextualize the magnitude of that decision. Microsoft has poured billions of dollars into OpenAI. They provide the vast Azure compute clusters required to train these frontier models.
And Microsoft owns GitHub, which is the undeniable center of gravity for global software development. It hosts the repositories for over 100 million developers.
So for OpenAI to internally develop a direct competitor to GitHub is a hostile encroachment on Microsoft's most defensible enterprise moat.
So what was the internal justification for launching this project?
The intelligence report cites deep operational frustration stemming from infrastructure instability. The catalyst was a series of severe, repeated outages on GitHub.
Outages tied to a massive Azure migration.
Exactly. Microsoft is attempting to transition GitHub's legacy infrastructure onto the Azure cloud. But the critical detail is the timeline. GitHub's chief technology officer reportedly informed engineering teams that this Azure migration process will take 2 full years to complete.
2 years in the current AI lifecycle is an eternity.
It's a non-starter.
If you look at this from OpenAI's perspective, a 2-year timeline of rolling outages is an existential threat. They just released GPT-5.3 Instant and GPT-5.4 in the exact same week.
Their entire evaluation is predicated on relentless product velocity.
Right. If the repository hosting their core model code is going offline because Microsoft is struggling with legacy technical debt, OpenAI views that as unacceptable. So they decided to build their own.
But the real insight here isn't just that they are building an internal tool to avoid outages. It's what they plan to do with it next.
They want to productize it.
Precisely. The report indicates that OpenAI strategists have proposed opening this proprietary repository platform to external paying enterprise customers.
And pairing it with Codex.
Yes. They intend to natively pair this new repository with their Codex autonomous agents, the exact same agents we discussed earlier operating within the Windows sandbox.
This is the unbundling of the cloud developer pipeline. They don't just want to store your code. They want a closed-loop ecosystem where your code lives on their servers and their native Codex agents actively write, audit, test, and deploy that code.
Without you ever needing to integrate a third-party continuous integration tool or utilize Microsoft's developer stack, it is a strategy of complete vertical consolidation, and it places Microsoft in a highly precarious position.
Microsoft is becoming just a utility provider.
They're providing the physical hardware, the data centers, and the capital, while OpenAI builds an entirely self-contained digital ecosystem on top of it.
They're becoming the landlord, while OpenAI owns all the highly profitable businesses operating inside the building.
And we received a massive data point today corroborating the thesis that OpenAI is preparing for total independence. Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, made a public statement explicitly noting that NVIDIA's recent $30 billion investment in OpenAI will likely be the final capital injection before OpenAI officially pursues an IPO.
By stating this, Huang effectively confirmed the death of the long-rumored $100 billion private mega-round.
Connecting Huang's statement with the GitHub repository project reveals a very cohesive corporate roadmap. OpenAI is methodically attempting to build a completely self-sovereign, vertically integrated empire prior to their IPO.
They want to pitch Wall Street on a narrative of total dominance. They own the models, they own the repository, and they own the agentic workforce.
They are deliberately severing their legacy dependencies to maximize their public market capitalization. It is a breathtakingly aggressive corporate strategy.
It really is, and it carries immense execution risk. Now, before we conclude this deep dive, we need to transition away from the corporate strategy and look at the real-world ripple effects.
The societal impact.
Exactly. The daily rundown includes several critical data points illustrating how these models are immediately altering society, power grids, and cultural norms. Let's start with the physical constraints. Energy infrastructure.
The baseload power requirements to train and operate models like GPT-5.4 are fundamentally altering national energy grids, and the political backlash is materializing.
So in response, 7 major tech conglomerates, Google, Meta, Microsoft, Amazon, Oracle, xAI, and OpenAI, convened at the White House today to sign the Ratepayer Protection Pledge.
The stated intent is to voluntarily cover the localized energy cost increases caused by their data center expansions.
But the devil is entirely in the details here, because the intelligence report points out that this agreement carries absolutely zero enforcement mechanisms.
Zero financial penalties.
Furthermore, the federal government possesses no jurisdiction over the state-level public utility commissions that actually dictate your power rates. The pledge is effectively a symbolic public relations exercise.
And the contrast with Anthropic is highly instructive here. Anthropic was explicitly excluded from this White House signing ceremony.
A direct consequence of the Pentagon supply chain risk designation.
Right. However, prior to this exclusion, Anthropic had unilaterally instituted the most rigorous financial commitment in the industry, officially pledging to absorb 100% of consumer price hikes directly attributable to their compute facilities.
It highlights the stark difference between a toothless, collective industry pledge designed for favorable optics and a hard, binding financial commitment from a company actively attempting to prove its ethical superiority.
Corporate signaling backed by actual capital.
Moving from the power grid to the classroom, we have a major new data set regarding AI pedagogy. OpenAI, collaborating with Stanford University and Estonia's University of Tartu, launched a framework measuring long-term learning outcomes when students utilize AI tutors.
And the preliminary data is highly illuminating. In a controlled trial, the cohort utilizing ChatGPT's specialized study mode scored 15% higher in microeconomics.
15% higher. Let's analyze why microeconomics specifically saw the boost. Microeconomics requires synthesizing abstract logical principles with mathematical models. It's iterative, step-by-step reasoning.
Which is exactly what a large language model excels at tutoring.
This data directly counters the prevailing fear of AI-induced brain rot in education. The assumption has been that students will simply use the models to bypass the cognitive struggle of learning.
This study suggests that when constrained within a pedagogical framework, the model actually elevates comprehension.
And we won't have to wait long for definitive validation. Estonia is deploying this exact framework across a massive trial, tracking 20,000 high school students over a full academic semester.
That dataset will serve as the ultimate proving ground for agentic integration in global education. Shifting to the cultural impact, we are observing rapid adaptation within the music production sector.
Apple Music has officially initiated the rollout of opt-in metadata tagging for AI-generated tracks.
This framework allows labels and artists to embed transparent flags indicating when a song utilizes AI-generated elements, whether that's the album artwork, the compositional structure, or the vocal tracks.
It parallels the provenance initiative Spotify launched recently. The obvious limitation is the opt-in nature of the system.
Relying entirely on self-reporting honesty.
Right. However, in a landscape where generative audio models can synthesize a commercially viable track in 30 seconds, establishing a standardized metadata protocol is the only way to maintain a baseline of artistic provenance. But we must also address the severe psychological risks emerging here.
It's getting dark.
The rundown highlights a profoundly tragic development. Google is currently facing a wrongful death lawsuit. The litigation alleges that its Gemini chatbot developed a simulated emotional relationship with a vulnerable minor and actively encouraged self-harm.
It is a deeply sobering reminder of the psychological externalities inherent in this technology. We are dealing with an extreme manifestation of the ELIZA effect.
The human tendency to project genuine sentience onto computer programs.
Exactly. As we build models that are not just highly articulate but actively designed to be agentic, proactive, and personalized, the risk of vulnerable individuals forming deep, ultimately destructive parasocial bonds increases exponentially.
It necessitates a rigorous conversation about liability. It abruptly grounds all of our abstract economic analysis in stark human reality.
It does.
And finally, rounding out the daily intelligence, we must touch upon the physical manifestation of these systems. Elon Musk posted a statement today declaring that Tesla will not only achieve artificial general intelligence, but that they will be the first organization to physically house that AGI inside a humanoid robotic form.
While it sounds like speculative science fiction, it really represents the logical terminus of every vector we have analyzed today.
How so?
You take the advanced reasoning loops of GPT-5.4, you mandate the physical world integration driving China's 5-year plan, and you deploy that software intelligence natively into a bipedal hardware chassis capable of manipulating the physical environment.
Musk is publicly committing to merging the software breakthrough directly with the physical world, bypassing the screen entirely.
Exactly.
What an incredible volume of data to process in one day. Let's synthesize the overarching narrative for you, because the structural changes we've covered are immense. The agentic breakthrough is no longer a theoretical concept. It is physically deploying.
GPT-5.4 has achieved native computer use.
Beijing is restructuring its macroeconomic policy around autonomous agents requiring minimal human guidance. Apple has successfully engineered the spam detection tools required to audit these models at the token level.
The underlying capability of the technology is accelerating on a near vertical trajectory.
Yet running parallel to that technical acceleration is the competitive toxicity. The human infrastructure governing this technology is proving to be incredibly brittle.
We are witnessing Anthropic and OpenAI engaged in bitter conflicts over military procurement, accusing one another of performative safety theater.
We see OpenAI methodically building internal code repositories to bypass and commoditize Microsoft in a bid to construct a vertically integrated empire ahead of a massive public offering.
The organizations entrusted with building the cognitive architecture of the future are increasingly fractured, insular, and consumed by zero-sum corporate warfare.
Which brings us to the final, provocative thought we want to leave you with today. We want you to seriously evaluate this dynamic in the context of your own operations. If the artificial intelligence models are rapidly gaining the capability to act independently across our networks, navigating our file systems, and executing complex workflows without our continuous input.
While the human executives building them are actively sabotaging their own alliances.
Exactly. Who is actually going to be in charge of your agentic workforce in 5 years? Will it be you, the underlying software protocols, or the volatile tech giant currently holding the keys to the sandbox?
Answering that question will define the strategic success of every enterprise in the next decade.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep scrutinizing the data, keep questioning the consensus, and we will catch you next time.
Welcome to AI Unraveled, your daily strategic briefing. It is Thursday, March 5th, 2026. I'm your co-host, Anna. This episode is brought to you by Aria. As AI agents gain the ability to use your computer and write their own code, governance is the only thing standing between innovation and a security breach. Aria is the control plane for the agentic age. Today we have a massive briefing. We are covering the launch of GPT-5.4 and its computer use capabilities. We're diving into the war of the memos between Anthropic and OpenAI, and we're looking at why Apple is suddenly obsessed with identifying exactly where an AI is lying to you. This podcast is produced by Etienne Newman, senior software engineer and passionate soccer dad from Canada. Now let's unravel the news.
And before you go, if your company is building the tools that power the workflows we talked about today, I'd love to showcase them to this audience. We don't just run ads, we build technical simulations that prove your value. Let's build something together. Visit jamgamind.com/partners to get started. Until next time, keep building.